Alright, one thing I mentioned but didn't really go into was the solder remover here. So obviously you're going to make mistakes, so this is what you do to fix that. I've got my soldering iron here, and I've got this extra tab on this wire that switch I've already wired up. So what I'm going to do here is just add some solder that I don't need. And alright, so now I've got this big mess of solder on this switch here. And what I'm going to do is you can just push the plunger down, you heat it up with a soldering iron, and then you push the button and it sucks some up, and then you can spit it back out. And that didn't get all of it, so I can do it again. And spit it back out. And now, you can see there's still some on there, but the hole is now visible, so you can use that again. Alright, the other way you can do this, it's a bit safer and doesn't require soldering, is some of these have tabs, and you can buy these connectors, which you can crimp onto the wires, and then you don't have to deal with a hot soldering iron. So, you get your crimper, the little connector, and you pull out a length of wire. Just make this the power, doesn't matter. And strip a bit. Oh, I've cut it. That's the trouble with these strippers. There we go. And let's make sure we get these consistent. So red is on the left if you read it, and so I'm going to want to put the red there. What you can do is you just put the wire into here and get your crimpers, and you can see this is blue, so you line it up with the blue crimp thing here. And you pinch down on the metal in there. There's going to be a bit of plastic that extends past the metal. You can pinch down on that, but it's not actually going to crimp anything. So grab down, squeeze as hard as you can, open it up, and now it's in there good, making good electrical contact. And then you can just pop this on here.
So the little holes in those tabs are designed to lock onto that connector.
Yeah, so now you have a successful attachment, and you just do the same X thing you did with this switch, but with the crimpers and no soldering. So, alright, so here we're going to do one of the more tedious and painful parts of building the ROV, which is soldering to the tiny little wires in the Ethernet cable. So, first, I need to take the lid off this thing so you can thread the cable in there properly. So, I'm going to screw one. Another. That out. That was never in there. And we'll take this off, and it very may will fall apart, but it didn't. Nice. The cracks in there can be kind of annoying to work. There's some garbage in here. Let me just.
And is there an acrylic glue that would fix that?
There is acrylic glue, and it's pretty incredible stuff. It's basically a solvent that you squirt it into cracks on acrylic, and it melts the acrylic together, so it's basically like one piece. It's not like Elmer's glue where you can like, it's this just kind of sticky thing in between that's kind of fragile. The acrylic glue will just like turn two pieces of acrylic into one. It's pretty ridiculous.
So crazy glue.
Yeah.
In effect. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really strong and pretty incredible. So we've got our holes that we drilled in this earlier, and we're going to use this connector to thread the Ethernet through. So we'll stick this in here. I had it going earlier. Oh, you know what? This might be a bigger connector than the one I was testing earlier. So let's see if I can find a smaller one. This might be it. Yep. I'll take that off so I can get a better grip. And this hole is so perfectly sized, I actually have to screw it in. And then, alright, that's in. This nut's too big. So, then we can get one of these. That might be too small. It is. This one. Yep, and then you just put the nut on the back side, hopefully. There we go. And that'll hold it in. Nice and firm. And then you get this end, put it, actually, whoops, forgot to put this thing on. And a little rubber piece came out of that, which holds it in. So you put that on there, thread this in, give it some slack, and then you can just tighten this down. And this part down. And it cinches this little rubber piece on the inside down around this, and now you can yank on it, pull it around, and it's not going anywhere. So now we get to the fun part of actually soldering to the Ethernet. So first thing you gotta do is you gotta get rid of this outer sheath. So to do that, we get these strippers, we run it around a few times. You don't want to cut any of the wires inside of this, so you gotta be a little careful. And just kind of run it along. It may take a few tries to get this off properly. There we go. Alright, so now you can see there's 4 twisted pairs here. These very small wires. So each one of these pairs is going to go to a motor. So you split it off into your 2 little tiny wires there. And what I found easiest about stripping these is they're so small you don't even need to use your strippers. You can just pinch on them with your fingernails and just yank and it's stripped. So that's basically the only nice part about this whole process. There you go. You've got your 2 stripped wires. And then they're going to go to your switch.
So is that stranded wire?
It is stranded wire, yes. So it's not solid core, which can be very brittle. If you get the solid core wire, it'll hold its shape when you bend it, but if you bend it too much, it'll just snap. The stranded wire, you can bend it all you want. It won't snap, but it won't hold its shape, and so they each have their benefits. So we're gonna do this soldering now, and I probably didn't need to tighten this up yet. I'm gonna give myself a bunch of slack so I don't actually have to do any soldering inside the box. And then what I'm gonna do is use the solder I've already put on this to connect these wires. So what I can do here is just melt it. It's a little difficult because there's nothing holding this switch steady. So I just kind of have to poke at it. Here, let me put this behind it. I won't move this far. And we melt it and attach the wire. Let it cool. Now, that's on there. Don't yank it too hard. Just a test. And then you're going to want to make sure you get the wire from the same pair and solder it onto the other side of this connector. If you don't get the same pair, your motor is either not going to run or you're going to hit one switch and a completely other motor is going to run. So that's not what you want. And then let's see, push this here. Doesn't look like I put as much solder on this one, so I'm just gonna add some solder first. That way I don't have to use 3 hands and hold solder, a wire, and an iron. Pro tip, just kind of add the solder. Now I've got a big glob on there that I can use in the future. And now I got this wire. We'll melt the solder that I just put on. Making sure I don't burn myself. And there we go. It's through the hole. Let it cool for a second. Make sure the stand doesn't fall over. And now you've got your first motor hooked up. And there you go. Just do that 2 more times. And you've got your motors assembled.
When you say 3 more times, you mean
2 more switches.
2 more switches, so you
4
need
more solder.
to strip more of the jacket off.
Yes, you very well, yes, because your switches are going to be farther apart. Your jacket may very well need to come back to here, so you can split the wires far enough apart to get to all these switches without just pulling on it super hard, and then you may break your wire because it's, like I say, it's not a very big wire. Put too much strain on it, it's just going to snap. So here I'm going to show you how to do some of the underwater soldering that needs to be done properly, or else you're going to get water in your electronics, and your RV is going to fry itself, and that is not what you want. So in order to do this, we have some, well, first of all, there's this stuff called heat shrink, which basically you put it over a wire when you do your soldering, and then you move it over the solder joint, and you apply heat to it, and it shrinks down, and it provides insulation over the solder joint so you don't bridge or anything and cause a short and your electronics to die. In this case, since this soldering is going to be done underwater, we have this special heat shrink called with adhesive in it, and it's waterproof. You can buy this stuff on Amazon for, I mean, this kit was 11 bucks, and it comes with more adhesive heat shrink than you'd ever need.
So that kind of heat shrink.
Yes. This heat shrink is good for above water soldering. It's really nice. It comes in this big kit, all these different sizes, different colors, so you can keep it color coded. But it's not good for underwater soldering. It doesn't make a seal, so we can't use it underwater. But you can use this above ground in your control box, and you'll be fine. So, in order to do this underwater soldering, first you need to get the other end of your Ethernet cable tether. We'll cut the plug off this end too. Dummy that. And once again, we will strip this way back. And it doesn't need to be that far back. In fact, it should be pretty short because the heat shrink doesn't extend that far in this kit. And you want a lot of extra length on your adhesive heat shrink, because if you bend it too close to the join where the solder is, and the heat shrink's too short, you're probably actually gonna break the seal on the heat shrink and let all the water in, and that's not what you want. So you've got this thing stripped, and let me just check down here which wires I hooked up. It was the blue pair. So I'll get my blue wires out, separate them, and untwist them, and we'll do the ye old finger strip again. Pull on it, pull on it. We got them stripped. And what we're going to do is hook them up to the end of the wires on this bilge pump so we can control it. So first step, what you want to do is you get a bigger size of heat shrink and you put it over the whole thing. This way you can isolate everything. Once you're done, you can just put this over the top and you cover the whole length of the adhesive heat shrink, and it's nice and sealed. But we don't need that right now. We'll slide it out of the way. Then you can get this thing, and you want a smaller size of heat shrink to cover this. Drop some. This, you don't want it to be too much bigger than the wire, else it won't shrink enough and you're not going to make a seal. But you don't want it to be like just bigger than the wire, or else you're not going to be able to move it around. And if you accidentally shrink it a little bit, which happens all the time, then it's donezo and you can't use it anymore. You have to cut it off and redo your solder. So this has a little warning tag on it that's getting in the way.
And one big rule of heat shrink is you can't put it on after you've soldered.
Yes. I've done this many times. Everyone who's ever soldered has done this a million times. You got to put your heat shrink on before you do the solder, or else you're going to have to undo your solder. It's really annoying. I've done soldering on these Ethernets on all 8 wires and forgot to put the big heat shrink on, and I had to reverse about 3 hours of soldering work just to put it back on. It's really annoying, and it will happen, and you just got to deal with it. So, you're not going to need this whole length of heat shrink to cover this. So, in fact, one of these will probably cover 2. So just cut it right in half with your any sharp implement like scissors or wire cutters. Now you got this, and this will be good for both of these connectors. What I've got exposed here is left over from the fuse demo we did. A bit too much length on it, so I'll just trim it. Now we can solder these to the Ethernet cable after, of course, we put the heat shrink on. Now, the way I like to do this is to get solder on each end of the wire you're going to solder together. So I just kind of fill this whole length with solder, and then I fill this whole length with solder. And now, we'll get the excess off so it stops smoking. What you're going to want to do is place these together. I'll put this here, that way I'm not waving it around with one hand. Maybe twist them together a little bit. Now that you fill them with solder, they're going to be a lot stiffer. You've basically, once you fill this wire with solder, turn it from stranded into solid core wire. So it holds its shape, but again, you can break it. So gotta be a little careful with it. And now, you've got these twisted together, you can just kind of melt the solder that's already in them together. You don't need to add any more. Now, you've made your connection. And we can do it again on the other one. So, same thing. Fill it with solder. Hopefully. There we go. And then you do the same thing here. Fill it with solder. Don't need that again. Put it back. Wire's still pretty warm, but it cools down pretty fast. Twist it together a bit, and then melt them together. Alright. Make sure to hold it still when it cools so it doesn't come apart. And now we have to heat shrink. So what we do is you slide the heat shrink over your joint. And then there's two methods of heat shrinking. First one is it just requires heat to shrink. Now it's a lot of heat, so you can't just like use a blow dryer. But you've got your soldering iron, that's pretty hot. So what you can do is just kind of float it near it and then kind of tap on it. And you will see it will start to shrink and kind of get on all sides of it, or else it won't uniformly shrink. And you can shrink one side a bunch and you can leave the other side unshrinken, but just get all sides, you get a lot more out of it, shrinkage out of it. And it may seem like it's not doing much, but it shrinks pretty fast once it gets going. Now we shrink the other side. Let's go. Now, since the Ethernet wire is so much smaller than the bilge pump wire, it may not make as good of a seal on the Ethernet wire. What that means is you may need to add an even smaller piece of heat shrink on the Ethernet wire as like kind of buffer to make it fatter so the heat shrink can grab onto it. I didn't do it in this case, but it may have been smart. Or else you don't make a proper seal. Now, you're not gonna short anything by just touching, but you may get some water in there. But like I say, we have the extra buffer of that big one. So now you can see here. Let me hit it a little bit more. But wipe that off because you can melt the heat shrink onto the soldering iron tip, which is a little unfortunate. You can see we've got this piece of black over it, and it's pretty well insulated at this point. And like I say, this is adhesive heat shrink. The way you can tell it's properly adhered is sometimes you'll see a little bit of liquid seeping out the end. That means it's adhered properly. Now, we can do the other method of heat shrink, and probably the more proper one, but it's a little bit more blunt. You can't use as fine of a process as the soldering iron. It's not this little tip. You use the heat gun. What this does, it's like a blow dryer, except it blows air really slowly and at like 500 degrees instead of 60 or whatever the blow dryer operates. Not 60, like 110. So this stuff, you gotta be a little careful with, because it's so hot. You just kind of cover it on it. You can see it's already shrinking. It's a lot faster than the soldering iron because it's a lot more condensed air. And kind of get all angles on it so uniformly, and then you're good. And you can see it's on there pretty good now. So that's one of the bilge pumps done. You do 2 more on these, and then once you're done, you slide this all the way back over, and then you can cover the whole thing with this piece of shrink. You do the same process, heat gun or soldering iron, you shrink it down. Alright, so here I'm going to actually work on building the frame of the RV, and while I do that, because it takes a little while, we'll talk about how everything goes together. So, first to build the frame, we've got big PVC pipe here. Doesn't really matter the size of the frame, so I'm just going to pick a length and then cut it. The only thing that matters is that they're all the same length, so we're going to need, I don't know, 4 of these, same length. And it's easier to just use a bit of a marker. That way I don't have to line up a PVC cutter. So, there we go. And we'll just be doing this over and over again. So, how does the whole RV go together? Well, first you've got your power supply, which is provided. Then you're going to want to, from that, you have the banana connector that you plug into the front, and we'll solder some of the, there's some longer wire in red and black to use as the power from there to your box. And then, once you get your power to the box, Robertson's getting it. This stuff, this will go from your banana connector and your power supply to the box. And once you get it to the box, it'll pass through a power switch, so you can have, tell your RV to be on or off. And from there, you turn on your power switch. The power will then split to all of your switches, and at the switches, those each will control your motor, and we show you how to solder the X's on that. So you just follow that, and you get your switches built up. Then from your switches, those all go down the Ethernet to your Ethernet connector to your ROV, and then at the bottom, once again, you split it to each of the bilge pumps like we showed earlier. And then, so, you've got your motors wired up at that point. Next piece of the frame. Yep, this here. Then, at that point, you need a frame to mount all your motors onto, which is what I'm working on here. So, we've got all these connectors here. Put them together. So there's 3-way 90s PVC connectors. There's another. And that's not all lined up. You gotta make sure. See, they're pointing one way and the other. That's bad. So just twist it. Another. And I got one more. There it is. This is a pretty big ROV. It doesn't need to be this big, but this is just demonstration, and I just kind of guessed. So there's one bit of our frame. Now, we need pipes coming off this way. While I got that, we'll talk some more. These probably don't need to be as long. We'll just make them, I don't know, this size? Sure, why not? One thing you do have to be very careful with these PVC cutters is if you get your finger cut in there, it will cut it right off. So they're very sharp, and they ratchet down hard. So you've got your motors wired up. Now you need your camera wired up. So to do that, you have your backup camera provided. In order to get power to that camera, you're going to need to run its power connector down alongside the Ethernet, and in order to do that, you can just run it down there and then, I don't know, maybe zip tie it to it. It doesn't need to be beautiful or anything. Then, once you get it down to the camera, the camera basically comes with instructions, and you solder the power connector properly. You hook up the two plugs. I don't know, you may want to put some more of that adhesive heat shrink on the plug that's going to be connected underwater. I don't know how waterproof that connector is. It looks kind of okay, but better safe than sorry. So you do that, and at that point, you basically got it wired up. You're going to bring that wire, that tether wire for the camera up through another one of those like bulkhead screw connectors in the side of the control box, and from there it'll go into your little display that came with it, and it should all be working. So when you're going to want to hook the power up to that camera to probably just after the power switch, so that it turns on when you turn the whole ROV on, or else it's either not going to turn on if you don't hook it up properly, or just always be on whether the switch is on or not, which is generally frowned upon. So now we've got these in.
So maybe you want to show the people how you stop it from falling apart.
Yes, now we've got some attachments here. Because right now there's nothing holding this PVC together. It's just slip it on and I can just, well, that's in there pretty good, but I can pop it right up off. And generally you don't want that happening to your ROV while it's underwater and have it just falling to pieces. That is bad. So.
But you might want to pull it apart to put in ballast.
Yes, that's true. So, in that case, you don't want it permanent, which is what PVC glue is. You put the PVC glue on and there's no chance that's coming out at all. So, a less permanent solution are self-tapping screws. So you just get one of these. Dropped it. It's a bit long.
Here's a bigger one. It has a chisel edge on the tip, so it cuts its own hole.
Yes.
But you may need to start with a smaller drill.
Maybe. We'll see. That one screw has a bit of stuff in the head. So these screws are a bit long. The ones we used on our ROV were very short. They were like 1/4 of an inch long. They just need to be long enough to go through these two thin pieces of PVC. But basically, you just, let me point this somewhere safe. You want to put it down. You just kind of put it near the end of one of these connectors so it goes through both pieces, and just kind of takes a little while to bite, and then when it does, it just goes right in. And that's perfect. So, obviously, you don't want it too long where it sticks out the other side and then you cut your finger on it. But now, there's no way this is coming apart until you unscrew it. So, that's what you want. Now, we've got to do this part. We've got more of these connectors. Put it on. On, and one more. There it is. Now, you may be wondering, how are we gonna mount these bilge pump motors? And that is a good question. And in this case, it's gonna be a little harder than other cases might be, because there's no good mounting holes on these motors, as opposed to some of the other ones you may run into. There's no screw holes or anything. So, the way we decided would be best is if you just zip tie them on. And it seems we've misplaced the zip ties. Yeah, I took them out. Alright, so we're back. Found the zip ties. They were on the ground in the corner. So basically, the way we decided would be best here is, well, first you got to line it up with the front and the back, so when you push forward on the switch, it actually goes forward. So in this case, I don't know, we can call that and the front. So we'll just line this up so the exhaust is pointed backward. And let's see if we can sneak the zip tie in through there. So it fits, that's good. So basically what I did there is these bilge pumps have this cover on them to protect this thing from getting clogged. They click into these slots. What I did is just slide the bilge pump, there's a little gap there. You can slide the zip tie into the gap and it sits in there pretty good. And let's see if it reaches all the way around. It might not, so we might need a second zip tie. I don't think it will. Alright, let's just make it easier on myself. Daisy chain zip ties. It works. So we'll put one here, and look, that's way easier now. And tighten it. And then that's kind of floppy, so we'll just do another one on the bottom. We're going to need a second zip tie here as well because circumference doesn't change. Put that on. Wrap it around. And tighten down as much as it will go. There we go. And now, it's a little loose, but that's on there pretty good. You may want to trim these off with some wire cutters or something. They're kind of in the way, but...
And snug it up with pliers, pull it
yeah,
a bit tighter? Maybe
pull it a bit tighter with some needle nose if you have them. I'm just doing this by hand right now as a general demonstration, so this is by all means not very professional, and you could do far better. So, there you go with that. And for the camera, it's mounting, I don't know, we're still kind of experimenting with it, so we're doing this just along with you. Where did that end up?
Well,
alright, once again, we're back. Found the camera, it's just on the other table. So what we've got here is just like a $40 backup camera that you can get on Amazon, but the important part is it's IP68 waterproof, which means you can go down 1.5 meters for up to 30 minutes at a time before you gotta kind of dry it off. So that is definitely good enough for our purposes here. So we don't need to do any extra waterproofing, which is a big pain when doing these things. So
in your bigger ROV, how do you waterproof the cameras? Because your cameras move.
In our big ROV, our cameras don't actually move. We just either use two to get different angles, or what we use is we use an old GoPro with a huge fisheye lens that can see big angles. But yeah, to waterproof it, we actually don't do anything special. We have a big tube that you may saw that big box of electronics I showed yesterday as we were filming this. That goes inside of a large acrylic tube, and inside that same tube go the cameras, so we don't have to cover the cameras or anything. They're just in this already waterproof tube and they look out from there. So, the camera. We have to mount this. The way we were thinking of doing this is we've got some T connectors here. Now the question is, will this fit inside? And the answer is no, it won't really.
The answer is some of the cameras you buy on Amazon will fit right inside that tube.
Depending on which camera you buy, this one doesn't. They will fit inside this T connector, and you can mount it in there and then just stick it on the PVC. Have a shorter length go here, PVC, another length, PVC in the middle. And it's mounted. And you can run the cable either inside the PVC if you want to be fancy and keep it hidden, or just drill a hole and have it come straight out. Go up the tether.
So how would you mount that particular one?
So this one actually comes on a mounting plate. So what might actually end up being the best option is I've got another length of PVC here, and I'm gonna cut it to length, and I made a mistake and didn't leave one of these pieces out to measure the 4 more I'm gonna need. So now I gotta do this the kind of weird way and line this up like this. And alright, there's my marker. There's my marker. Somewhere around there. Once again, it doesn't have to be precise. Alright. And we'll put this in one end here, and alright, perfect. Now, obviously, you'd want to do that 3 more times to finish building your RV, but for the sake, this is just for mounting the camera.
Or maybe they want a triangular RV.
Or maybe a triangular RV. Or maybe you want to make it a cylinder. There are many different designs that work. I've always built a rectangular RV because it's easiest to make with flat pieces, which is what we use. But, like we say, how are we going to mount this camera? In this case, alright, so we're back. Phone stopped ringing. So, we got to mount this camera. So, in this case, this camera comes on this mount, which means we can just kind of, like I said, it's a backup camera. It's supposed to go on top of your license plate frame. But in this case, it means we can just kind of put it here, and then there you go. Hopefully, will that just sit in there because it's magnetic? It is magnetic. I don't know if you want to point the camera down a bit so we can see this better.
My apologies.
Yeah. So, in this case, oh, it's falling out. Wave it around too hard. We can, I think. Alright. Let's try. This is a bit
pre-drill
harder.
hole.
Let's do a pilot hole. We're going all out here. So this will make it easier for the screw to go in, and I don't have to handle it super weird. Alright, easy pilot hole. Put this back in. Where to put my screw? There it is. And now there's a hole for this to sit in. And I'm still failing.
Remember, these kids will be working in teams, so there'll be
you'll
5
have
people trying
multiple
to
hands,
hold the screws.
So one of your friends can be holding the camera while someone else screws it in. Oh, that was so close. Maybe I need a bit of a bigger pilot hole. This will be much easier on your end when you have more than one person working on it. There we go. There we go.
Success. You don't want to make it look too easy.
Yeah. Now this screw is too small, obviously. So if your screw is too small, you can just use a washer, which we don't have. But what we do
I'll
have,
get a washer.
we do have a bigger screw.
Okay.
All right, we've got washers now, which means we can actually get this thing to mount. So we take our screw back out because obviously that didn't quite work. So we've got washers, these little things here. Basically what you do is you stick the screw through them, and they A, help spread the load out so it doesn't put too much stress on one part, and B, if your screw is too small, you can effectively make the screw head bigger so it can hold in bigger things or go through bigger holes. So what we're gonna do here is you just put the screw through the middle, and now the screw can basically hold on something that size instead of that size, which is what we want. So we'll just try this again, and now the screw hole's already made, so this should go a bit easier. We gotta there. Mr. Robertson can help me out. This will go much better. Now we'll put that in. All right. Now it's not very well. The camera's not very well centered because I just kind of eyeballed it and I did a poor job. But maybe when you're doing it for real, you can whip out tape measure, make sure it's close enough to the middle. But once you got that side in, it's big easy, and you can just. I'm gonna need another pilot hole because. Don't want to stab yourself in the hand. So we got our pilot hole. Put this back in. Trying to go at it too hard. Slow and steady. There we go. And now that's on. And you got this mounted. Now, you want it pretty level. This is, you can kind of move this one around. So, should be fine. And then, here's a good example of why going big is not always better. You can see that screw just went right through the back, which is a safety hazard. But, that's all we had for now, and this is just a demonstrative piece, so. It's just a good. So this here is just a good example of what not to do.